The story kicks off in a rundown motel room. Amidst the chaos, an angry man glares at a girl who walks in. She's calm, puffing on a cigarette, talking about a magical watcher. Then, bam! A bolt of lightning cracks through the air, frying her on the spot. Silence. The room thickens with fear. Panic erupts. Accusations fly, voices shout, but no one knows what just happened. Callum Wells bursts in, gun drawn. His mind snaps back to a moment a month ago, a meeting he can't shake. Agent Theron from the Arcane Regulation Guild had rolled up his sleeve, revealing a strange symbol, and told Callum he was linked to an attack on Shehi's fitness center. Callum, confused, denied everything. Then Theron dropped the bomb. There was a dragonborn creature on the loose, and Callum was one of the few witnesses. Magic was real, and Callum, he was a mage. That morning, Callum had attended his mother's funeral. At the cemetery, he met a man who felt otherworldly. Turns out the owner of his local gym was one of those beings. Shehi wasn't fully human, and he asked Callum to help a new visitor, Marie. Callum trusted him despite the eerie vibe. Shehi had been a pillar of support since Callum lost his wife. While showing Marie around, she suddenly collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Before Callum could react, 3 armed men barged into the gym. Shehi didn't flinch. He shielded Marie and the others, a wall between them and danger. Callum hit the floor, throwing himself over Marie just as bullets filled the air. But bullets didn't faze Shehi. They ricocheted off him like spitballs. His eyes flared red, his body twisting into something monstrous. Then came the roar, deep, guttural, shaking the walls. Flames erupted from his mouth, engulfing everything in sight. Smoke thickened. Callum's head pounded, and before he could do a damn thing, he blacked out. He woke up to regret slamming into him like a freight train. Marie was still unconscious. He scooped her up and stumbled toward the exit, determined to escape. But fate had other plans. A loose wire dangled from the ceiling. Callum didn't see it until it was too late. A shock tore through his body. His nerves screamed in agony, but he pushed forward. The fire spread like a living beast. His legs shook, his breath ragged, but he refused to stop. Then, a portal. Out of nowhere. Before he could process it, he and Marie were outside, alive. Callum touched the ground, making sure it was real. Turning, he saw the man from the cemetery. The stranger ignored Callum, summoning water to smother the flames. Callum rattled, demanded answers. The man didn't bother responding, just spoke into a headset about the dragonfire, the victim, the witness. Frustration boiled over. Callum pushed for an explanation, but the man only asked about his qualifications. Callum, head pounding, refused to answer until he got some damn clarity. Then, click. A cuff snapped onto his wrist. His headache vanished. Hours later, Callum sat in an Arcane Regulation Guild room. Agent Theron studied him, surprised he was still conscious. The man beside him smirked. Whatever the cuff was supposed to do, it seemed to help Callum instead of hinder him. Theron noted how unusual it was for a 30-year-old mage to awaken this late. Callum, still dazed, insisted he had a normal life. He was an architect, for God's sake. Theron dismissed that. You'll have better opportunities once you learn magic. Callum scoffed. Or maybe I just forget all this and go back to my life. Theron didn't flinch. Run, and the guild will hunt you down. We burn deserters. Callum's blood ran cold. Seeing the guild members, Callum realized this wasn't an opportunity. It was a dictatorship. Serve or die. The weight of it settled in his gut. Agent Theron asked if he was ready for the first test. What kind of test? Callum asked, eyeing the glowing symbols on the ceiling. Theron explained it would reveal his magical abilities. At first, nothing happened. Then, pain. Blinding, searing pain. Callum crumbled to his knees, begging them to stop. Theron barely acknowledged him. It'll be over soon, he said, like it was nothing. The pain peaked, then darkness. When Callum came to, Theron was watching him. Space mages are rare, he mused. You'll need a mentor. Callum's gut screamed that this was a scam. Can I just go home? Before Theron could answer, another man entered. Agent Sen barely acknowledged Callum, glued to his phone. Callum tried making small talk in the car, asking about his abilities. Sen finally glanced up. Spatial magic isn't harmful. You'll likely work in transportation. Then he went back to his phone. At guild headquarters, Sen handed Callum a laptop packed with magic knowledge. Callum studied it, learning about mana and vis, one external energy, one internal. He felt the gap between him and lifelong mages, but he refused to be left behind. Testing his abilities, he made a pen hover, then shot it into the ceiling. The rush of power filled him with something dangerous, possibility. But the more he read, the more the guild's truth unraveled. They weren't just regulating magic, they were controlling it. sacrificing independent mages to maintain their power. Callum slammed the laptop shut. He wasn't going to be their pawn. That night, Callum packed his things. He wasn't staying. Quietly, he cracked the window, slipped outside, but the moment his feet hit the ground, Sen woke up. By the time he reached Callum's room, it was empty. The window was wide open. Sen cursed. Callum sprinted through the streets, blending with the crowd. He knew Sen was fast, faster than him, and he was right. Sen soared above the city, tracking him. "You're only making this worse," Sen called out, closing in. Callum pushed forward, heart hammering. He wiped a storefront window, checked his reflection, then got an idea. Seconds later, Sen grabbed a figure with Callum's hair and clothes. But when the person turned around, wrong guy. Sen's jaw tightened. Callum had ditched his clothes and disappeared. Somewhere across town, Callum hailed a cab. He gave the driver an address far from the guild's reach. Once there, he changed his appearance. New hair, new name, Chase Hall. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Agent Theron chewed out Sen for losing him. Their boss wasn't going to be happy, and she wasn't. The Archmage's wrath was swift. Magic coiled around her like a vice as she lashed Sen to the ground. "Find Callum Wells," she hissed, "or I'll do it myself." And when she did, he wouldn't be captured. He'd be executed. Callum drives to his next hideout, an old house on the outskirts of town. The house has cracked walls, and a sheriff with his daughter is standing there. Callum gets out of the car, looks at the house. Sheriff Arthur Langley asks Callum if he is here for the property. Callum agrees, and then Sheriff Arthur introduces his daughter, Jessica, who waves hello. Callum introduces himself as Chase Hall, hiding his real identity. Sheriff Arthur shakes his hand but gives Callum a suspicious look. Callum looks around the house. He smiles, liking the calm atmosphere and the idea of fixing up the house. While tapping the wood of an old cabinet, Jessica mentions that Callum seems too young to be retired. Callum feels tense but quickly lies about improving his health. Sheriff Arthur watches him carefully as Jessica talks about the challenges of selling the house. Callum finds it better for him. The next day, Callum starts thinking that his money will last for about 2 years, and he can live peacefully there. But he feels anxious, knowing the guild is still hunting him. He realizes he needs to study magic more. Callum thinks about how old books say spatial magic is limited to portals and simple spells. He doubts the book's accuracy because Archmage Duval controls most spatial magic training. Callum remembers the first time he accidentally created a portal and wonders how his powers work. After thinking, he realizes his subconscious mind helps him use spatial magic. He focuses and stretches his arm forward, and to his surprise, a glowing portal appears, full of magical energy. Creating the portal makes him tired, and he leans against the wall to catch his breath. Once he recovers, Callum steps toward the portal, ready for whatever happens next. An invisible force lifts him and carries him through the portal. He feels happy about his success. He happily looks at his hand, still feeling the magic. He checks where the portal appeared and feels good about how far he traveled on his first try. However, his curiosity pushes him to try more with spatial magic. On Monday, he is in the shower and finds the shampoo bottle is empty. This gives him an idea. He makes a small magical passage and reaches through it to get a new shampoo bottle. He smiles as he pulls a full bottle through the portal. On Wednesday, he works on making a magical ball, a skill that young mages learn. He looks at it, liking how it looks, even though it's not useful for fighting. By Friday, his experiments progressed. He starts to feel a connection to telekinesis, which is usually for battles. He uses spatial magic to control gravity and make rocks float around him. Happy with his method, he sends the rocks flying at a tree, breaking its bark. On Sunday morning, he meditates in a quiet forest clearing near his house. Using the magic around him, he learns to imagine his home even with his eyes closed. This new skill lets him see through walls, but it takes a lot of focus. Even though the range is small, he continues to explore behind the walls. He is surprised to find Jessica, the old owner of the house, walking around and calling his name. Callus opens his eyes and quickly leaves the forest. When he meets Jessica, he acts casual and normal. Jessica talks about the new school year and how kids still cut through the yard, even though it's not allowed. Callum calmly brushes it off, only mentioning the unfinished cleaning. Jessica offers to let the local kids help, smiling as she says they like working outside. She invites Callum to visit and tells him she's close by. After waving goodbye, she leaves. Callum promises to visit but feels uneasy inside. He wonders if she noticed anything strange from his training. As he looks around the yard, he realizes how many magical traces are left behind. Realizing the danger, he rushes inside to find a way to remove the magical energy. The thought of someone discovering his secret makes him feel worried. Meanwhile, Agent Theron is in his office looking at papers his colleague brought him. She says these are the results of a standard test on Callum Wells. The test shows no past magic use, but there are strange results. Agent Theron looks closely at the data and asks for more details. The girl explains that when they checked the energy levels, the bracelet showed only 3 units of energy left, but before putting it on, Callum absorbed 97 units of mana. Agent Theron becomes confused and wonders what does that mean. The girl is inquisitive and explains that a normal beginner wouldn't handle that much magic. She also doesn't understand why no spells were cast. The girl finishes her report, saying she doesn't know what's going on. She mentions he hasn't used magic for 30 years. Agent Theron looks at the results carefully and wonders about Callum Wells. He realizes Callum is no ordinary person. Callum feels a wave of relief as he looks at the data. Most of the hard work is finally done, and his goal is so close now. He releases a surge of energy. Callum is confident that it's enough for his plan. He carefully places a ball on the metal bearing. As soon as he pulls his hand away, small swirls of magical energy appear. The magical energy gets absorbed into the bearing's metal. Callum jumps in excitement. He is thrilled that the experiment works. He found the ancient vortex spell online by chance. It helps store energy in the bearing's balls and makes it harder for the Acrane Regulation Guild to track any magical traces. Holding the bearing in his hand, Callum feels proud of how quickly he has learned advanced magic in just a few weeks. But even with this success, an emptiness fills him. Sad memories suddenly flood his mind. The day he had to run from the Acrane Regulation Guild, right after his mother's funeral. Callum realizes everything happened so fast, he didn't have time to say goodbye properly. He didn't get the time to process what he has lost. Now his parents and his wife are all gone, buried side by side. He finds himself thinking about his hometown, where they had once been happy together. As Callum stares at the gray ceiling, he wonders if his wife Celine would have liked it here. He quickly shakes off the memories, pushing them aside, and focuses on his current problems. Callum is frustrated and clenches his fists. He curses the Acrane Regulation Guild for trying to control him. He believes that the Acrane Regulation Guild forced him to run. After that, Callum decides to explore the town and learn more about it. In a small cafe, a friendly counter girl welcomes him and immediately notices Callum is new in town. Callum asks her for any recommendations. The girl suggests trying the specialty steaks, but Callum barely hears her. A strange feeling puts him on edge, making him alert. Using his magic, he senses a hidden basement under the cafe floor. In his mind, he sees a giant dog, almost the size of a man, and feels even more cautious. Deep in thought, Callum suddenly hears someone call his fake name. He turns and sees Sheriff Arthur, who greets him warmly. Callum tells Sheriff Arthur he is checking local cuisines. Sheriff Arthur introduces the counter girl as his niece, Clara, and proudly talks about her cooking skills. While Clara goes back to the kitchen, Callum and Sheriff Arthur talk about the town. Sheriff Arthur explains how much the locals respect personal boundaries. This confuses Callum, so he asks for more details. Sheriff Arthur leans in and quietly warns him about suspicious strangers in the area. He asks Callum to report anything unusual. Callum starts to wonder if Sheriff Arthur thinks he's suspicious. Sheriff Arthur reassures him, saying he only had a slight concern at first. Sheriff Arthur's serious tone about the strangers makes Callum uneasy. He wonders, could the Acrane Regulation Guild be involved? His thoughts are interrupted when Clara returns with his food. Back at home, Callum examines the magical mark on his wrist. It pulses faintly, reminding him that it could reveal his location. He decides to remove it. Looking closely under a lamp, he guesses the dot in the center limits his magic. It seems like simple ink, so he prepares to erase it. Focusing his magic on the mark, Callum feels a moment of hope when the dot starts to fade. But then, he feels immense pain through his body. His face twists in agony, but he doesn't stop. He's determined to finish what he started. After unbearable pain, the core of the mark separates from his skin. Callum is exhausted. He carefully picks up the small ball in his hand, the source of his pain and the first step toward his freedom. Callum hopes the rest of the tattoo will fade on its own, so he chooses to ignore it. Callum's wrist is bleeding. He throws the piece of the guild's mark into the fireplace, feeling like he's getting rid of part of his old life. The next day, Callum is working on his laptop when an idea hits him. He thinks the vortex spell might not only store energy, but also release it. He becomes excited and starts imagining a magical power bank, like a phone battery, for emergencies. But just as Callum is getting into it, there's a knock at the door. He becomes anxious and starts to wonder who it might be. A thought runs through his mind that maybe someone from the Acrane Regulation Guild is at the door. Using his magical vision, Callum looks through the door. He sees 2 men, Sheriff Arthur Langley and a young deputy. Callum becomes confused, but, he decides, 5-0 open the door and greets them. Sheriff Arthur apologizes for showing up unannounced and says he has some questions for the new resident. Callum becomes fearful as he wonders if he's done something to draw attention. Ignoring Callum's concern, Sheriff Arthur asks where he was at 3 a.m. last night. Callum becomes anxious and panics. The scene shifts to 3 a.m. last night. Callum is laying on his bed. He hasn't been sleeping well, thinking about the strange behavior of the townspeople and the eerie things he's seen, like the dog-like creature in the cafe's basement. The more he thinks about it, the more certain he becomes. The Sheriff Arthur family, including Jessica and Clara, are shifters. Callum remembers his conversation with Sheriff Arthur at the cafe. Was Sheriff Arthur trying to warn him or scare him? Sheriff Arthur's shifting tone, friendly one moment, serious the next, only adds to Callum's worries. Callum takes a deep breath and realizes he may need to leave town for a while to stay out of trouble. Suddenly, a hissing noise outside breaks his thoughts. Callum becomes attentive and gets up. Using his magical vision, Callum scans the dark street. He sees a blurry figure moving quickly towards some bushes. Its movements are so strange they don't seem human. Grabbing a torch, Callum finally decides to step outside to check it out. Callum tries to find the creature. He checks the bushes. The bushes sway under the torchlight, but there's no sign of the creature. He wonders if maybe he realized it. A cold gust of air, unlike normal wind, sends shivers down his back and fills him with fear. Panic takes over, and Callum runs back inside, slamming the door shut. Back to the present day, Sheriff Arthur asks again where Callum was at 3 a.m. Callum hesitates and tries to stay calm. He tells Sheriff Arthur that he was asleep. Sheriff Arthur takes out a notepad and asks Callum if he has any proof for that, something like a home security system. Callum asks Sheriff Arthur if he needs a lawyer. Sheriff Arthur tells him he is not really a suspect and it would just be nice to cut his name from the list. While going inside, Callum reveals he has a security system, but it is just for door logs and he has no cameras. He feels relieved that there's no evidence of his magical activities. Sheriff Arthur takes a deep breath and finally reveals why he's there: a murder. Callum feels a wave of fear and shock. The deputy reveals someone broke into Old Man Hardy's house. He asks Callum if he noticed anything strange, like a break-in at Old Man Hardy's house. Callum denies seeing anything, trying to sound casual. Callum realizes he was so focused on magic guilds and shifters that he didn't consider an actual criminal might be out there. Sheriff Arthur's intense stare makes Callum nervous, and he feels trapped. He mentions the strange creature that woke him up last night, saying that's all he knows. Sheriff Arthur seems interested but doesn't say much. He thanks Callum and says they'll contact him if they find anything. As Sheriff Arthur and deputy leave, the deputy quietly tells Sheriff Arthur he doesn't fully trust Callum. Sheriff Arthur also thinks Callum is hiding something, but he doesn't believe he's a murderer. On the way back, Sheriff Arthur shares his thoughts about the murder, suspecting vampires might be involved. Things are about to get complicated in town. Later, Sheriff Arthur faces a tough-looking man who accuses him of messing with the pack's territory and being involved in the murder. The man stays calm and mocks Sheriff Arthur, denying everything. As the argument continues, it's clear there's tension between shifters and vampires. Sheriff Arthur reveals that the murder was done by a vampire, and they tried to cover it up. The man tells him he doesn't see why he should care. He only takes responsibility if it's one of his own vampires. Sheriff Arthur insists that it was one of the man's vampires, and he will hold them accountable. The man laughs and tells Sheriff Arthur to try. Sheriff Arthur gets angrier but holds himself back, unable to act on his frustration. The man taunts him, saying if Sheriff Arthur wants to challenge him, he's up for it. Sheriff Arthur shouts that they never had vampires in town before the man came here. The man glares at him. Finally, Sheriff Arthur orders his deputy to get the man away from him. That evening, Sheriff Arthur talks to his daughter, Jessica, about his worries. He thinks the vampires are becoming a bigger problem, and he's frustrated because they don't have enough people to stop them. He feels powerless against their vampire leader. He curses the vampire and clenches his fist in anger. He wishes he could force the vampire nest to leave town. He even wishes he were younger, so he could do it himself. Suddenly, a voice comes through the cell phone, asking if Sheriff Arthur is done with his tantrum. Sheriff Arthur takes a deep breath and responds, "Yes, Alpha Chester." Alpha Chester replies, saying that without proof, the Ukraine Regulation Guild will side with the vampires. He tells Sheriff Arthur he'll send him to deal with the wolf pack, but they can't officially help if a challenge happens. Alpha Chester continues, saying that not only this town is facing this problem, at least 5 other towns are facing the same issue. Sheriff Arthur shows his anger toward the Ukraine Regulation Guild, but Alpha Chester understands. He says if they catch the vampires in the act, they can destroy them. Alpha Chester urges Sheriff Arthur to keep a sharp eye out. The real question isn't whether the vampires will kill again, it's who they'll kill next. Callum goes to the store to buy what he needs. He is careful as he picks out the items. He is constantly watching the other customers. Since the recent events, his mind has become more paranoid. While checking the items, his thoughts race with ideas of leaving town or finding ways to make his house safer. Once home, Callum sits down and starts thinking about selling enchanted items online. He wonders if he can make some extra money that way, but he quickly shuts down the idea. He knows that selling magical items online is dangerous, especially since there are strict rules about who can use magic forums. Making an account to sell things could easily expose him, and he cannot afford to be discovered. He becomes annoyed and slams his laptop shut. Deciding to focus on making his home more secure, Callum turns to his magic. He wants to enchant the walls of his house with a gravity shield to protect against bullets. It seems like a good idea, but the spell does not work the way he expects. It is too complicated for him to handle. The frustration builds up as he realizes how unprepared he is for the dangers on his way. Callum's spells only last for about a minute, and that is not enough time to protect him from anything serious. He knows that to make better spells, he needs access to advanced techniques, ones that only an experienced mage like Archmage Duvala can teach. But those techniques are tightly guarded, and without them, Callum feels stuck. He feels like he is trying to figure everything out on his own, without the right knowledge or skills. At the gun store, Callum picks up a small box of ammunition. The counter guy smiles and Callum talks to him about the recent crimes in the town. After that, Callum looks at the guns displayed on the walls. He thinks it's not just the recent murders. He can't get away from the feeling that the Ukraine Regulation Guild could find him anytime. He starts to wonder about how bullets might work against supernatural creatures. He wonders if they would be effective, or if he's just wasting his time. Nearby, he overhears two girls talking about mallets, and quickly recognizes them, Clara and Jessica Langley. Their odd choice of tools makes him suspicious. Suddenly, Callum appears behind them. The girls become terrified. Clara cries out, tears in her eyes, while Jessica looks down, clearly anxious. Callum apologizes and asks about the recent murder. Jessica mentions churchgoer Jones in a quiet, lifeless voice. Callum wonders if there is another victim besides James Hardy. Jessica tells him there was a second murder last night. Miss Joan Gruber is also dead. Upon hearing this, Callum becomes shocked and wonders if this is some sort of serial killer. Callum admits he hasn't heard the news, and Jessica explains that they're considering closing their cafe out of fear. Callum offers to help them. The girl smiles and thanks him. After Callum leaves from there, his thoughts grow darker. 2 murders in 2 nights suggest a serial killer is at work. Feeling paranoid, he checks his newly bought weapon. He knows Sheriff Arthur won't want to call the Ukraine Regulation Guild, even with the rising danger. But with this many people dying, they may not have a choice. At home, Callum sets up a diagram on a board, using red threads to connect the events. The murders near his house make him think another could happen soon. He sees 2 big threats. The first is a supernatural serial killer, and the second is Ukraine Regulation Guild agents that are sent to investigate. To prepare, Callum sets up mana barriers around his house and packs a bag in case he needs to leave quickly. He also wears an enchanted pendant for extra protection and picks his weapon. After checking his windows, Callum uses his mana sense to scan the town. He spots Jessica is watching over the cafe. Clara is walking to the store, and Sheriff Arthur is at the office. Callum sits in his chair with his weapon ready, but he falls asleep. The next morning, he wakes up and becomes alert. Panicking, he grabs his weapon and curses himself for falling asleep. He uses his magic to rush to the door, where he finds Jessica, who is running toward his house. She looks frantic, and her desperation makes Callum feel scared and worried. He blames himself, thinking he should have been more careful with his magic. In a panic, Callum opens the door for Jessica. Jessica grabs him and starts crying. She is sobbing and tells Callum that Clara has been kidnapped. She points towards the vampire that they, the vampires, took Clara. Jessica talks about how the vampires make fun of Clara, calling her Sheriff Arthur's puppy before they attack her. As she talks, she sees a vampire with a red aura and a cruel smile. She begs Callum for help, reminding him of his promise to support her family. Callum hesitates, not sure if he should use his magic. Then he holds her and tells her to come inside the house. Callum calms her enough to get the details about Clara's kidnapping. He thinks he can't leave Jessica. Clara is still alive, so there is hope, and he can't let vampires hurt her. Inside the house, Callum asks Jessica if the vampire only takes Clara and doesn't kill her. Jessica says yes, and Callum thinks he can't fight a group of supernaturals fairly. He's not on their level. Jessica asks Callum to help, and he promises he will do everything he can. He grabs his weapon and asks for more information. He feels nervous, hoping this is not a mistake. After that, Callum and Jessica drive to the motel where the vampires are. As Callum approaches, he feels danger in the air, the sense of something supernatural again. He sees a girl having a cigarette in her hand, and it is interesting. Jessica takes Callum to a nearby room, saying her family can help. When Callum enters the door, he becomes terrified and shocked to the shifters inside. Sheriff Arthur roars in anger and asks Jessica what she is doing. He thinks Callum is with the Ukraine Regulation Guild and that they still have involved them yet. Callum recognizes Sheriff Arthur and promises to keep their secret, calming the situation. Sheriff Arthur considers his word and then roars. He makes sure that everyone hears. After that, Sheriff Arthur asks Callum what he can do to help. Callum says he won't answer any questions and would like to be included in what's happening. Sheriff Arthur explains that the vampires have been in town for days and are trying to take over their territory. They also have a mage with them. Callum remembers the same girl with the cigarette he saw earlier. Sheriff Arthur says the vampires have killed 2 people so far. Callum gets confused and asks Sheriff Arthur why he hasn't done anything about it. Sheriff Arthur explains that the shifters can't act without proof because of a treaty set by the Ukraine Regulation Guild. If they get involved, the guild will say they are the aggressors. He curses the Ukraine Regulation Guild and makes fun of their peacekeeping rules. Callum is surprised to hear this. He thinks it's crazy that the vampires are killing people. They can't do anything because of the guild's strict rules. Callum uses his mana senses. If Clara is in that motel, he should be able to find her using his mana. Callum finally sees Clara inside, tied up, with 3 vampires nearby. Callum tells Sheriff Arthur that the vampires claim Clara is there willingly. Sheriff Arthur gets furious and says that's a lie. Callum asks what will happen if Sheriff Arthur gets Clara back. Sheriff Arthur says they'll contact Alpha Chester to send more wolves. With backup, they'll be strong enough to fight the vampires and drive them out of town. Callum asks how to kill a vampire. Sheriff Arthur explains that it's hard to kill vampires without a rare material called morite. Without it, they have to destroy the vampire's heart or brain, but it's tough because vampires are so fast. Callum thinks it will be difficult with a gun, but agrees. Jessica asks him if he can do something. Callum reloads his rifle, determined to act. He says he will bring Clara back, but he'll need some things. Sheriff Arthur takes Callum to a holding cell. He hesitates before explaining that this is the only soundproof place available. His voice is tense as he reminds Callum that time is short. Callum studies the room carefully, then takes off his bag. He says he needs 10 minutes to prepare, but Sheriff Arthur firmly cuts it down to 5. Without another word, Sheriff Arthur turns and heads for the exit. As the room falls silent, Callum feels the weight of the moment. He takes a deep breath and focuses on his preparations. He thinks about why he took on this dangerous mission. Fear of failure comes to mind. If he fails, the Ukraine Regulation Guild, vampire anger, and Shifter's disappointment could all lead to trouble. But what worries him the most is the unknown mage abilities in the motel. Callum cannot stop thinking about Clara, exhausted, chained, and sitting on the dirty floor. He reloads his weapon to resolve the matter and fight. He knows he can't just stand by and do nothing. In the motel room, one vampire talks about the strange silence from the shifters. The mage simply waves her hand, saying their watchers are still working. Suddenly, the air around them twists. A portal opens right next to the mage's face. In a flash, a sharp strike knocks her down, blood pooling around her. The vampires cry out in shock and panic as they realize the shifters finally attacked them. In between the chaos, Callum shows up holding the gun in his hand. He prepares himself for the next move. Callum has spent a long time thinking about portals, teleportation, and mana sense. The Ukraine Regulation Guild believes spatial magic is not meant for fighting, but Callum disagrees. That's why he has studied its hidden abilities. He has come up with a new idea, combining portals with weapons. He imagines throwing a knife into a portal in front of him, only for it to strike a target far away. A shotgun seems even more effective, proven by the spent shell casing at his feet. He focuses through his scope and locks onto his next target. A portal appears near a vampire's head. Before the vampire can react, a bullet ends him instantly. The third vampire, wearing a hood, lets out a short scream of help, but another bullet stops him. Time is running out. Callum quickly turns to his next task, getting Clara out through the portal. The distance makes it difficult, but his spatial sense gives him hope. A light surrounds Clara as Callum gets himself teleported there. He carefully removes Clara's handcuffs. He quickly teleports her through the portal. He becomes grateful as he becomes successful in his plan. A vampire rushes in, screaming when he sees the empty room. He looks around, not noticing the small portal forming behind his head. A moment later, his body falls lifeless to the floor. Callum feels exhausted, but decides to keep going. Chaos spreads as the remaining vampires panic. They see the open door and the bodies of their dead allies. Callum takes advantage of their confusion, making more deadly portals appear near their heads to kill them. Callum is getting weaker and has trouble breathing. Sweat drips from his arms, and he can barely stand. But he refuses to stop. He keeps firing through the portals, determined to kill every last vampire. Even if he uses up all his magic, he is ready to fight to the end. Soon, only one vampire is left. The vampire hides in the corner, terrified. Callum opens one last portal near his head. The vampire tries to curse him, but his words disappear as he dies. Jessica and Sheriff Arthur stand frozen at the door, tension thick in the air. For 45 seconds, everything is silent. Then a knock on the door makes them jump. Jessica rushes forward as it opens. She finds Callum's face for answers. Callum tells Jessica it's done, and Clara is saved. Clara, now free, looks around. She is confused. Jessica asks her questions, but Clara doesn't know what to say. Sheriff Arthur is shocked by how fast everything happened. He demands Callum for an explanation. Callum tells Sheriff Arthur that all the vampires are dead. He orders Sheriff Arthur to call the fire department for the motel. Sheriff Arthur is confused. He asks Callum that he doesn't feel any magic on him. He notices the pendant around Callum's neck glows with a strange light, holding back the magic inside it. Sheriff Arthur asks Callum how this is possible, but Callum doesn't explain anything to him. He simply reminds him to hurry before the fire spreads to the rest of the neighborhood. After that, Callum packs his things into the car. He thinks about the valuable items he took from the vampires. He is already planning to go home and sort through them. Just as he throws his belongings in and shuts the car door, Callum hears footsteps and a voice behind him. Jessica runs up to him, wanting to thank him for saving her family. Her cheeks turn red as she speaks. Callum tries to brush off her gratitude. Before he can finish his sentence, Jessica steps closer and kisses him on the cheek. The unexpected kiss makes Callum blush, feeling awkward and unsure of what to say. Jessica quickly pulls away, pretending she needs to help Clara. She waves goodbye while Callum gives a response awkwardly and waves goodbye, hoping to see Jessica around. The scene shifts and Sheriff Arthur and other shifters gather around a phone to call Alpha Chester. He explains what happened with the vampires and the issue is resolved now. Alpha Chester asks about what they have done to the vampires. Sheriff Arthur quickly assures him that no one from the shifters pack got involved. But this only confuses Alpha Chester more, and he demands to know what happened. Sheriff Arthur explains that a mysterious man offered to help, but wanted to stay anonymous. Alpha Chester tries to figure out if this man is a shifter or a mage, but Sheriff Arthur isn't sure. Sheriff Arthur spots a mage with a tattoo on Callum, but no clear magic energy raises even more questions. Alpha Chester is sure that the other vampires will not be happy about this, and he is right. We see the vampire's leader is already watching the motel fire, but in the end, the truth is clear. If things happen the way Sheriff Arthur says, the vampires can do nothing about it. Sheriff Arthur realizes they owe their survival to this unknown, mysterious man. He watches his daughter and niece hug each other in relief. Alpha Chester gives one last warning to keep an eye on the mysterious helper. If he is a mage, he cannot be trusted. Callum walks home and goes straight to the shower, hoping to wash away his guilt. Cold water runs over him for half an hour, but he still feels dirty inside. He keeps seeing the creatures he killed in his mind. He cannot forget the blood on his hands. He tells himself they were vampires, but it does not help. The way he killed them so easily scares him. His magic is getting stronger, and he is not sure if that is a good thing. He looks at himself in the mirror. His face is tired and hollow. Doubt fills his mind. The Ukraine Regulation Guild always controls magic, but is that really right? As he thinks, a small portal appears in his palm. Suddenly, anger rushes through him. He clenches his fist, making the portal disappear. He refuses to follow the guild's rules. If he had, Clara would be dead. His reflection stares back at him as he struggles with his thoughts. He looks at the fireplace, watching the flames. He wonders that the motel fire destroyed the evidence, but did it also expose his identity? Callum is frustrated with his mistakes. His anger grows, and his biggest regret is not keeping everything a secret from Jessica. He lets out a heavy sigh as he realizes the truth. He will have to leave town soon. Sheriff Arthur walks into a quiet cafe where the staff greets him with warm smiles. He keeps his voice low and asks if the guests he's expecting have arrived. The woman behind the counter tells him that the guests are waiting downstairs in the basement. As he takes off his hat, Sheriff Arthur silently hopes that no vampires are among them. But when he hears that there's a mage in the group, he starts to feel uneasy. Taking a deep breath, he heads down to the basement. There, he finds two quiet figures waiting for him. One is Agent Ray Danforth, a confident man from the Magical Regulation Guild, and the other is his partner, Agent Felicia Black. Sheriff Arthur greets them, hoping they can help make sense of the situation, and shakes Agent Ray's hand. Agent Ray immediately brings up the need to clean up the motel, stressing that it's a top priority. Sheriff Arthur explains that guild members are still searching the area, but several bodies are already prepared for examination. Agent Ray glances at his partner, feeling uneasy. Felicia's expression shows that she has noticed something important. They soon arrive at the morgue, where Agent Ray carefully looks at the dead bodies. His experienced eyes quickly notice that the wounds on them are similar. Sheriff Arthur is eager to protect the local shifters. He insists that the injuries are strange, and that there's no clear proof that the shifters are responsible. Agent Ray smiles and glances at the nervous sheriff. He tells him that they will find out the truth soon enough. The silence is broken when Agent Felicia steps forward. She moves to the head of one of the bodies and starts her examination. Energy flows around her hand as she activates a magical search. A soft glow surrounds her as she tries to search the victim's mind for any memories that might remain. After finishing, Agent Felicia reports that there is no useful information. Sheriff Arthur reacts nervously. Without hesitation, Agent Felicia moves to the next body. Sheriff Arthur is clearly worried about what might be found. The second victim's memories show the sound of distant gunfire just before death, but nothing more useful than that. Agent Felicia patiently explains that the panic the victim felt in the last moments has made the memories unclear. Agent Ray thinks for a moment, then comes to a conclusion. He says the killer is highly skilled. Sheriff Arthur finds it terrifying. Agent Ray asks Sheriff Arthur about the situation, and Sheriff Arthur responds anxiously. He tries to hide his worry and talks about the horrific wounds, but Agent Ray's sharp gaze sees through him. He can tell Sheriff Arthur is hiding something. Agent Ray decides that they will stay in town. He makes it clear that this unknown vampire killer is a serious threat. Sheriff Arthur quickly offers to arrange rooms for them, but his growing unease is obvious. Agent Ray refuses the offer. He says that if Sheriff Arthur is being truthful, they would rather question a few locals. Sheriff Arthur listens carefully. Agent Ray explains that if Sheriff Arthur believes the shifters are not involved, there are two possibilities. The first is an unknown outsider, someone skilled and dangerous, which would make catching the killer very difficult. The second, which Agent Ray hints at, is even more troubling. A local resident, someone driven to violence by the vampire's actions. Sheriff Arthur immediately denies that anyone in town could take on the vampires alone, but Agent Ray and his partner exchange a knowing look, signaling the start of their own investigation. Meanwhile, Callum looks through the valuable items he took from the vampire. He feels disappointed at first because everything seems ordinary. As he checks carefully, he finds the usual things: firearms, cash, and a few mysterious hard drives. Looking closely at the weapons, Callum notices something interesting. There are no traces of magic on them, which means they are not just normal guns. But when he checks the bullets, his eyes light up with interest. They contain a powerful mix of silverite, morite, and ked, metals well known in online forums for their strength against supernatural creatures. As he sorts through the bag, something unusual at the bottom catches his attention. He pulls out several strange ceramic slabs and immediately senses they might be important. Studying them closely, he guesses they are connected to ancient writings. Then he notices the large amount of cash and gold bars. He stops for a moment, thinking. Selling the gold could make him rich, but he knows he needs to be practical. If he has to run, having money will be essential. He also knows that regular store supplies won't be enough. He will need special magical tools. But what interests him the most are the ceramic plates. Their presence suggests they came from outside this small town. Before he can think more about it, a sudden noise from the street makes him freeze. A wave of panic rushes through him. Someone might already be here. Callum realizes he needs to hide the evidence before someone finds it. He quickly moves and puts everything back into the bag. He hides it deep in his closet. Taking a deep breath, he forces himself to stay calm. Callum opens the front door and sees Jessica and Clara. They both smile at Callum. Jessica looks surprised to know Callum stayed. She leans in and whispers that a Crane Regulation Guild agents are in the city. Callum feels a wave of worry at the mention of an investigation, though he already expected it, just not this soon. Clara, standing behind Jessica, softly explains why they have come. She rushes forward and hugs Callum tightly, catching him off guard. Clara is truly grateful. Callum feels shy and awkwardly pats Clara's head. He reminds her to keep his role in the events a secret. Jessica smiles warmly and hints at a special gift they have brought for him. She claims they understand, but they can't just forget his favor, as Callum would not be able to come to the cafe for some time, so they brought him the food. Just then, Callum's stomach growls loudly, making everyone laugh. He blushes and admits he is very hungry after such a long and tiring day. Callum invites Jessica and Clara inside. He asks for more details about a Crane Regulation Guild agents. Jessica talks about her father's strange meeting with special agents this morning. She mentions Agent Felicia's ability to talk to the dead, but sadly, it didn't help much. Callum is relieved that the vampires haven't exposed what he really did. Clara is annoyed and explains how their search for clues in the burned motel was useless. Paul smiles warmly and thanks them for sharing everything honestly. But then, Jessica's face turns sad as she tells him that Alpha Chester is worried. He thinks the help they received might make them feel like they owe Callum too much. Callum suddenly reacts when he hears Alpha Chester's name. Clara carefully explains the complicated power structure, saying the local sheriff follows orders from the more powerful Alpha of the Midwest. Sitting on the couch, Callum shakes his head and refuses to accept any reward, showing his kindness. Clara looks shocked at Callum's complete rejection of a reward. To avoid talking about duty and debts, Callum gently pats Clara's head, making Jessica laugh. Clara, in a playful mood, pretends to lock her lips with an invisible key. Meanwhile, a Crane Regulation Guild agents arrive at the motel ruins and demand an investigation report. An expert investigator notices faint traces of magic, but it's unclear if they will be useful. When looking at some documents, Agent Ray is shocked to find out that one of the vampires was an aeromancer, a mage who controls air. After confirming that no other magical traces remain, Agent Ray warns that the Minneapolis Council will be furious about stolen vampire artifacts. He tells Agent Felicia to search for them on the black market. Agent Ray, with his experience, feels something is wrong about the fire. It doesn't seem natural. On the way back, Agent Ray picks up a small stone from the ground and examines it. Agent Felicia watches him closely, remembering how the shifters firmly denied any role in the fire. But Agent Ray doesn't seem to believe it, as the shifters are hiding something. Agent Felicia suggests that Agent Ray should eavesdrop, reminding him that he can hear anything within a mile. Agent Ray replies he already is, but there's nothing useful for the case. A soft, light, magical sphere appears in Agent Ray's hand, slowly expanding and covering the area. Ray casually mentions some gossip about what happened, but nothing important. Agent Felicia offers to make them talk by force if needed. Agent Ray tells her to keep things civil for now. When the spell is complete, Agent Ray neatly adjusts his tie, returning to his serious and professional look. He checks his phone to wrap up the remaining interviews. The next person is Chase Hall, a 30-year-old man. The guild agents move fast, reaching their destination in no time. They knock at Callum's door. Callum opens the door just enough to see who is there. Agent Ray greets him. Agent Felicia's appearance is shocking. She has pointed elf ears and dragon-like scales on her face. Callum tries to stay calm, but his surprised expression gives him away. Without hesitation, both agents pull out their magical guild IDs at the same time, proving their authority. Callum looks at the IDs and his magical senses tell him that these agents are much stronger than any vampire he has faced before. Agent Ray tells Callum, this is an investigation, and Callum has no choice but to cooperate. His instincts tell him to fight back, so he demands a lawyer, refusing to give in to their pressure. But Agent Felicia immediately rejects the idea. A cold stare and a slight puff of steam from her nostrils make her message clear. Callum feels a mix of confusion and exhaustion as he realizes how serious the situation is. The tension in the air grows heavier. Agent Ray suddenly steps closer and asks Callum about his conversation with Sheriff Arthur regarding vampires in town. Callum tries to stay serious, but Agent Felicia's magic suddenly takes effect. She demands Callum to answer about the fire. The pressure builds until Callum shouts in frustration. He refuses to accept their accusations. Agent Ray takes a deep breath and steps back. He accepts a temporary defeat. Callum watches them walk away. His tense stare follows them. He knows the danger is far from over. The fear of being exposed fills him with fear and anger. Just when Callum thinks the conversation is over, Agent Ray stops and turns slightly. His cold voice delivers a final warning. Callum is not allowed to leave the judicial district. The shocking news that he is now a suspect makes Callum freeze in place. Callum steps into the house to grab his belongings. His situation is getting worse. Panic fills his chest as he realizes he must leave the town. He knows that fighting the guild's agent magic will only make him more suspicious. Callum throws his belongings into his car. He also takes the gun with him. His hands shake as he starts the engine. His mind is full of anxious thoughts that more agents will come soon. He has no time to waste. He deeply regrets that he can't stay longer in the town, and he never gets to say goodbye to Jessica. But for Callum, survival comes first in this situation. As his car moves through the empty highway, he realizes someone will surely notice that he is gone. The Crane Regulation Guild will issue an arrest warrant for him, but he decides to focus on avoiding busy roads and trusts his magical instincts. Just then, something catches his eye. A red SUV parked on the roadside for sale. He smiles and makes a quick decision, finding the situation perfect. After that, Callum steps into a nearby store. A man standing behind the counter gives Callum a look. He asks how he can help Callum. Callum smiles as his guess was correct. He knows right away, the man is a shifter. His magical aura gives it away. Callum hesitates for a moment before speaking. He tells the man that he needs a new ID. He mentions a recommendation from certain acquaintances. The store clerk gives him a suspicious look. He asks if they have met before. Callum ignores the question. Instead, he places a gold bar on the counter and adds that he also needs a vehicle. The clerk's expression changes instantly. His suspicion disappears as he becomes interested in the valuable payment. In just 10 minutes, Callum holds a brand new ID in his hands. The clerk assures him that it works in both the human and supernatural worlds. Checking the ID carefully, Callum reads his new name out loud, Denver Brown. Seeing the profession listed as professor, he smiles and thinks about the possibility of wearing glasses. The man asks if Callum needs more help. Callum asks him about a place where he can buy books on magic. The person suggests going to the Pearson store, but warns that it doesn't have many special books. Callum thinks there wouldn't be, but decides to visit the bookstore the next day. After Callum gets back in the new car, he feels guilty about what the Langley family will think of his sudden disappearance. He remembers how kind and helpful Sheriff Arthur, Jessica, and Clara were. He feels like they've become his family. An inner voice tells Callum that he should explain things to them. Late at night, the shop clerk is counting items and gets annoyed while counting. He talks about something being lost. Suddenly, a strange portal suddenly appears behind him. A voice from the portal scares the man, and he curses in fear. The voice asks him to send a message to the Alpha of the Midwest. The clerk is confused and terrified. The voice tells the man to pass the message that Clara's friend is safe. When Alpha Chester gets a strange message about Clara's friend, he worries about his people and tells the man to stay away from this dangerous person. After the call ends, Alpha Chester asks the shifters about the mysterious person. One of them says the stranger was around when he joined the Alpha Langley squad. Alpha Chester asks the shifter if he can recognize the scent, and the shifter assures him. Alpha Chester orders Roy and John, the shifters, to find this mysterious man at all cost. The two shifters nod and raise their hands, agreeing to follow orders. During a break in their car, Agent Felicia and Agent Ray talk about Callum, their lead. Agent Ray suggests that Callum may not even know he has magical protection. Felicia says that Callum seems very suspicious. She notices that Callum has been around people attacked by vampires, which makes her more interested in him. She thinks that maybe Callum stopped a vampire attack without knowing it. Agent Ray takes a deep breath because there are no other leads. The agents decide to check on their suspect again. Both Agent Ray and Agent Felicia reach Callum's house. They knock on the door, but no one answers. Agent Ray says they should act fast and not waste time. He uses magic to unlock the door. Inside, the house feels empty, but Agent Ray notices something strange. The house is too clean, like no one lives there. This makes her suspicious. He uses magic to scan the whole house, including the backyard. Suddenly, Agent Ray finds something and becomes curious. He tells Agent Felicia knowing they found something important. They use magic to pull a strange metal object from under the bed. It lands by Agent Ray's feet, and he looks at it closely. The metal object has signs of magic. Even though it's just a regular piece of metal, it still has some magical energy. Agent Felicia realizes that their suspect is connected to magic, even if he doesn't know it. Ray gets up from the floor and says it's pointless to keep checking. He is sure that Callum won't come back. Agent Felicia suggests putting out a wanted notice for Callum's car. Agent Ray continues to study the mysterious object, looking at it from different angles for hidden clues. The agent decides to talk to Alpha Langley about this new development. Callum is resting in his new car. It's his new shelter. As the new day begins, the sun wakes Callum, giving him his first good sleep in days. The uncomfortable position makes his shoulders ache, and he stretches the stiff muscles. He starts to worry about the Ukraine Regulation Guild agent. He realizes he cannot waste time and it can lead to trouble. Callum remembers about the conversation with the shifter salesman about the bookstore. He hopes the bookstore is real. He knows he needs to learn more about magic, so he carefully leaves his car and walks across the parking lot to the old building. The bookstore has an ancient look that catches Callum's attention. As he gets closer, he notices the old-fashioned feel of the place, and the lack of modern technology makes it feel even more magical. When he walks inside, a dusty smell hits him, so he covers his nose. The simple book racks make the store look ordinary, hiding its true power. He follows the strong magical energy of an old man behind a counter, reading ancient books. The old man seems to have magical energy around him, showing that he practices magic. Callum greets him kindly, but the old man just gives him a cold stare and ignores him. This makes the atmosphere feel tense. Callum decides to explore the store on his own. He sees a large collection of books, many of them fantasy novels. One book with a bright pink cover makes him feel disgusted, but he checks the price anyway, hoping it won't be too expensive. To his surprise, it costs $200. He checks the prices of other books and finds that most are at least $100. Then, Callum notices a large gray book with a mysterious symbol on the spine. It's called Magical Defense, a treatise on defense, and promises to teach important magical secrets. Callum looks through the book and decides he needs to buy it, even though it's expensive. Just as he decides to buy it, the old man shouts, "Buy first, and then read later." Callum smiles as the tension between them fades. Callum asks the old man if he has any manuals for beginner mages. The old man looks at him suspiciously and says it's too late for him to start learning. Callum lies and says he's a professor buying books for students. The old man snaps his fingers and magical energy surrounds the shelves, making books float. Callum is amazed by the magic and watches as 3 ancient books float above his head and land in his hands. He is impressed by the old man's skill. At the cash register, Callum adds up the $1,300 for the books. He gives the money to the old man, who takes it without saying anything, and goes back to his work. Callum stands there for a moment, but the old man finally asks if he needs help. Callum shakes his head and leaves the store, feeling angry at the old man for being rude. 6 hours later, we see the shifters are still searching for Callum. They both are disappointed because they can't find any magical traces of their target. One of them notices a faint scent though, and suggests asking the clerk about any suspicious visitors. The other one tells him to stay quiet and not draw attention. They move silently and find a parking lot with several cars. The first shifter smells a familiar pickup truck and starts searching the area. He sees the surveillance cameras and asks a contact for footage. The second shift suggests talking to Lucy, a hacker who can easily access the camera footage. Back in his car, Callum feels frustrated as he looks through the books he bought. They are mostly useless. The only useful information is about ceramic focus plates used by vampires. These plates help with casting spells, but the books don't explain how to get them. Callum gets even more angry and frustrated. He is determined, though, and believes there must be a book out there that will teach him the secrets of magic. Callum grips the steering wheel tightly as he continues his search for knowledge. Days later, Callum considers he has met vampire, shifters, and other mages. He even found a fae shop that sold crystals and herbs. But he hasn't encountered dragon blood so far. He remembers Shehi and wonders if he was a rare species. He hopes Shehi lives out the situation and not dead. Callum's life has been moving so fast, and he had no time to think about it. He doesn't know what he would be able to find next. While on his way, a new bookstore catches Callum's attention. He hopes it will offer useful information and better service. When he walks inside, a powerful magical energy hits him, making him freeze in surprise. He notices a girl arranging books, and her strong magic draws him in. He wonders who she is.